Good morning, students. Welcome back to your English class. In the previous tutorial, we have read the text of pages 80 to 83. Today, we shall continue the same and complete the story An Angel in Disguise. The objectives of this video are, by the end of this video, you will be able to read and understand the text of pages 83 to 86 of the story An Angel in Disguise. You will be able to understand the meanings of difficult words. You will be able to answer the questions related to the text. Students, in the previous tutorial, we have read that Maggie, the poor disabled child, was adopted by Mr. Joe Thompson. When confronted by his short-tempered wife, Joe told her that he was just letting her stay at their house for the night and he would take her to the poor house the next day. Joe talked to his wife and told her how Jesus scolded his disciples who did not help the little children, and how he himself picked up the children in his arms and blessed them. Mrs. Jane Thompson began to feel motherly affection for Maggie, as she had no children of her own. Now, students, let us read the text further. Open your treasure trove books at page number 83. On entering, Joe did not go immediately to the little chamber. His heavy tread about the kitchen brought his wife somewhat hurriedly from the room where she had been with Maggie. Joe thought it best not to refer to the child, nor to manifest any concern in regard to her. "How soon will supper be ready?" he asked. "Right soon," answered Mrs. Thompson, beginning to bustle about. There was no asperity in her voice. "Children, note down the meanings of difficult words. Tread means walk, manifest means show, supper means dinner, bustle means move in an energetic and busy manner. Asperity means roughness of manner or bitterness." On entering, Joe Thompson marched towards the kitchen and did not go towards Maggie's chamber. On hearing the heavy sound of Joe Thompson's footsteps approaching the kitchen, his wife hurriedly came out from the room where she was sitting with Maggie. He tried not to show concern towards the child and asked her when dinner would be ready. Mrs. Thompson replied that it would be ready soon. Then she quickly engaged herself in kitchen work. There was no bitterness in her tone. After washing from his hands and face the dust and soil of work, Joe left the kitchen and went to the little bedroom. A pair of large bright eyes looked up at him from snowy bed, looked at him tenderly, gratefully, pleadingly. How his heart swelled in his bosom! With what a quicker motion came the heartbeats. Joe sat down and now, for the first time, examining the thin frame carefully under the lamplight, saw that it was an attractive face and full of childish sweetness which suffering had not been able to obliterate. Snowy bed is a metaphor. Tenderly means lovingly. Gratefully means thankfully. Pleadingly means requestingly. Swelled means expand. Bosom refers to chest. Frame means structure. Obliterate means destroy. After washing his hands and face, he left the kitchen. Who left the kitchen? Yes, Mr. Joe Thompson left the kitchen. He went to Maggie's room. Maggie looked at him with a pair of large bright eyes from the snowy bed which she was lying on. Maggie looked at Joe lovingly, thankfully and requestingly. Joe felt very happy. He could feel his heart beating fast. He sat beside her and for the first time, under the lamplight, he observed how thin Maggie was. He was charmed by the childish sweetness of her face, her soft, warm touch and pleasant voice. He realized that Maggie's suffering had not destroyed her childish sweetness. Children, snowy bed is a metaphor. Now, what is a metaphor? Yes, metaphor means showing unrelated comparison. A bed cannot be snowy. Now, children, why Maggie looked at Joe Thompson tenderly, gratefully, and pleadingly? Yes, she looked tenderly at him because she was so happy that she has a home. She looked gratefully, thanking him for not having left her in that hut. Pleadingly, maybe looking at him and requesting that she does not want to go to the poor house. Let us proceed further. Your name is Maggie, he said, as he sat down and took her soft little hand in his. Yes, sir.
Her voice struck a chord that quivered in a low strain of music.
Have you been sick long? Yes, sir. What a sweet patience was in her tone. Has the doctor been to see you? He used to come, but not lately. No, sir. Have you any pain? Sometimes, but not now. Struck a chord means caused someone to feel sympathy, emotion, or enthusiasm.
Quivered means vibrated.
Lately means recently. Now Mr. Joe Thompson started a warm conversation, holding Maggie's hand. He asked if her name was Maggie, and she replied in a positive manner.
Quivered in a low strain of music.
Refers to the voice of Maggie that was trembling. Her trembling voice made Mr. Joe Thompson emotional. He asked if she had been sick for long and if the doctor visited her. She replied that the doctor used to visit her earlier but not lately. He asked her if she had any pain. She replied that sometimes had but not at this time. When had you pain? This morning my side ached and my back hurt when you carried me. It hurts you to be lifted or moved about? Yes, sir. Your side doesn't ache now? No, sir. Does it ache a great deal? Yes, sir. But it hasn't ached any since I have been on this soft bed. The soft bed feels good.
Oh yes, sir. So good.
What a satisfaction mingled with gratitude was in her voice. Ached means pained. A great deal means a lot. Mingled means mixed. He further asked her when she had pain. Maggie replied that in the morning when Joe carried her in his arms, her side and back ached. Joe asked if she felt pain when she was lifted or moved about. She replied that she did feel pain. He further asked if her side caused her pain, to which she answered with a no. He asked if it was a lot of pain. Maggie replied with a yes. She further continued that she felt much better on the soft bed. There were respect and gratitude in her voice. Let us proceed further. Supper is ready, said Mrs. Thompson, looking into the room a little while afterwards. Joe glanced from his wife's face to that of Maggie. She understood him and answered, "She can wait until we are done. Then I'll bring her some things to eat." There was an effort at indifference on the part of Mrs. Thompson, but her husband had seen her through the window and understood that the coldness was assumed. Joe waited, after sitting down to the table, for his wife to introduce the subject uppermost in both of their thoughts. But she kept silent on that theme for many minutes, and he maintained a like reserve. At last she said abruptly, "What are you going to do with that child?" "I thought you understood me, that she was going to the poor house," replied Joe, as if surprised at her question.
Supper means dinner. Indifference means lack of interest. Coldness refers to rudeness. Assumed means to pretend to express a feeling falsely. Uppermost means highest in importance. Like means same. Reserve refers to lack of warmth. Abruptly means suddenly.
Now, a little afterwards, Mrs. Thompson called out that the dinner was ready. Joe looked at her face first and then he looked at Maggie. Looking at her husband, she realized what worried him and said that Maggie could wait till they had dinner. Then she would get something for her as well. Mrs. Thompson tried to show that she was least interested in Maggie, but her husband had already seen her engaged in a conversation with Maggie through the window, so he understood his wife was just pretending to be rude. Joe waited for his wife to begin Maggie's topic, which was a most important subject in their thoughts at that time. But Jane kept silent on the topic for many minutes and maintained her lack of warmth for Maggie. At the end, she abruptly asked her husband what he was going to do with Maggie. Joe was surprised at her question
and replied that he felt that she would have understood that Maggie was to go to the poor house.
Mrs. Thompson looked rather strangely at her husband for sonic moments and then dropped her eyes. The subject was not again referred to during the meal. At its close, Mrs. Thompson toasted a slice of bread and softened it with milk and butter. Adding to this a cup of tea, she took them into Maggie and held the small waiter which she had placed then, while the hungry child ate with every sign of pleasure. "Is it good?" asked Mrs. Thompson, seeing with what a keen relish the food was taken. The child paused with cup in her hand and answered with a look of gratitude that awoke to new life old human feelings, which had been slumbering in her heart for half a score of years. Sonic refers to off-speed at which sound travels in air. Waiter means serving tray. Relish means enjoyment. Gratitude refers to thankfulness. Slumbering means in deep sleep. A score of years refers to 10 years. Jane was quite disturbed after listening to him. She looked strangely at Joe for some quick moments and then dropped her eyes. The topic was not brought up again while they had their dinner. The sweet patience of Maggie's tone and the gratitude in her eyes had charmed Jane too. It was reflected in the supper she prepared for the girl. She toasted a slice of bread and softened it with milk and butter, adding to this a cup of tea. Mrs. Thompson saw with satisfaction the keen relish with which Maggie ate the meal. The look of gratitude in her eyes gave new life to the dried up feelings in her heart, which had been sleeping in Jane's heart for 10 years. Let us proceed further. "We'll keep her a day or two longer. She is so weak and helpless," said Mrs. Joe Thompson in answer to her husband's remark at breakfast time on the next morning, that he must step down and see the guardians of the poor about Maggie. "She'll be so much in your way," said Joe. "I shan't mind that for a day or two, poor thing." Joe did not see the guardians of the poor on that day, on the next, nor on the day following. In fact, he never saw them at all on Maggie's account for in less than a week. Mrs. Joe Thompson would as soon leave thought of taking up her own abode in the almshouse as sending Maggie there. Shan't means shall not, guardians means caretaker, for means because, abode means home, almshouse means a house founded by charity.
Joe told his wife at the breakfast time the next morning that he must then go and see the guardians of the poor house.
About Maggie. To this his wife, Jane Thompson, insisted on keeping the child for a day or two because she was weak and sick. Who was weak and sick? Yes, the disabled child Maggie was weak and sick. Mr. Thompson said that she would hinder Jane's daily work, to which Jane expressed she was more than obliged for a day or two to spend time with the innocent sick child. Joe did not see the guardians that day. Neither did he see them in the near future because he knew that in a week Mrs. Thompson would be deeply attached to the child and would not let anyone to take her away to the poor house. Let us proceed further. What light and blessing did that sick and helpless child bring to the home of Joe Thompson, the poor wheelwright? It had been dark and cold and miserable there for a long time,
just because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself,
and so became sore, irritable, ill-tempered and self-afflicting in the desolation of her woman's nature. Now the sweetness of that sick child, looking ever to her in love, patience and gratitude, was as honey to her soul, and she carried her in her heart as well as in her arms, a precious burden. Cold means feeling less, sore refers to angry, self-afflicting means causing pain to oneself, desolation means loneliness, honey to her soul is a simile. The author is beautifully saying that the child Maggie has blessed the poor wheelwright's house with her presence. His wife Jane had become rough and irritable due to the loneliness that she felt. She didn't have children, and that made her more ill-tempered and hard-hearted woman. Maggie had found a home, a doting father, and a loving mother. Love had returned to the life of Joe Thompson and Jane Thompson. The stories about this reawakening of love in Mrs. Thompson. Joe and Maggie together had brought about this miracle. The sick child, looking ever to her in love, patience and gratitude, was as honey to Jane's soul. And she carried her in her heart as well as in her arms, a precious burden. Honey to her soul is a simile. What is a simile, children? Yes, it is a figure of speech used to show similarity between two persons or things, using as or like.
A precious burden. Children, it is oxymoron. What do you mean by oxymoron? Yes, it means when two contrasting things are put together. A precious thing cannot be burden, and a burden cannot be precious.
Let us continue. As for Joe Thompson, there was not a man in all the neighborhood who drank daily of a more precious wine of life than he. An angel had come into his house, disguised as a sick, helpless, and miserable child, and filled all its dreary chambers with sunshine of love. Wine means sign of happiness, disguised means concealed, dreary means gloomy or sad, chambers refers to rooms. Joe Thompson's life had completely changed. There was no man in the village who was as happy as Joe was. An angel had come into Joe's house, disguised as a sick, helpless, and miserable child, and filled all its dreary chambers with sunshine of love. Children, so this brings us to the end of this tutorial. I hope the entire story, An Angel in Disguise, is clear to all of you. Homework for you is, do the work sent to you in your SNAP homework. Thank you, children.